Hello, I'm Bruce DuPois. Coming up today on News Talk, a conversation with Northern Virginia Congressman Don Beyer. Among our topics, the presence of American forces in Syria. The president has said repeatedly we would not have boots on the ground there. Now, though, a small contingent is facing battle, evoking fears of the early days of our involvement in Vietnam. Also, a new day on Capitol Hill, a new speaker, some big potential conflicts resolved, at least for now, and the chance that a highway bill may finally be coming down the road. Later in the show, we're taught that 911 is for emergencies only. Sadly, many people use the life or death emergency number for just about everything. The shocking details from investigator Chris Pabst and a conversation with Fire Chief Gregory Dean.
From News Channel 8, this is News Talk with Bruce DuPois.
It's a Monday in the nation's capital. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We've got such a great lineup for you today. I hope you like the show, and we're glad that you are there. For some time, President Obama has assured the American people that we would not send troops to Syria. No boots on the ground, the administration has insisted. But now we have boots on the ground in one of the most dangerous places on earth. Does the president have the legal authority to send troops there, and is it wise policy? This is the first of several topics we'll discuss today with Northern Virginia Congressman Don Beyer, a Democrat. Welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce, very much. Those are hard questions.
Always good to have you with us. Let's begin there. Let's do the authority thing in a moment. Is it wise policy, and are you concerned about what some have seized on as a conflict between what we were assured would happen down the road and what is happening now?
Yeah, but we live in a dynamic world where situations are changing all the time. It has been a real struggle trying to figure out what the correct U.S. policy towards Syria has been. You have the hawks on one side saying we should have been much more aggressive in terms of arming moderates and having perhaps a no-fly zone. The Obama administration has taken a more, we don't exactly know who the good guys are over there. That many of those opposing Assad, whom we want out of office, have turned out to be Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, even ISIS. And we keep seeing weapons that we've been providing pretty consistently ending up in the wrong hands. So, and the most interesting recent thing is now we have Putin and the Russians bombing, essentially providing air support for Assad. And I think that's really changed the dynamic and changed the White House and the National Security Council's decisions about what to do.
Do you understand the analogy, some people, for some, if you know your history or lived through the 60s and early 70s, there are elements of this that remind us of Vietnam. A kind of murky mission, starting small, a concern that it will grow, that will get bogged down, and that American lives will be lost for something that we'll have trouble explaining to loved ones back home why they died. What was the American interest?
And even more recent would be the same problem in Iraq. Murky mission, what exactly were we doing? What were the meaning of the American lives lost? So, again, I think we're trying to unfold that. One of the big questions on Capitol Hill
not to oversimplify, shouldn't we keep American troops out of that quagmire until we have a slam dunk reason where we're propping up an ally who's under, where we can identify good guys and bad guys, and maybe we've identified the incumbent regime as the good guys and they're under threat, so you can lay out a rationale that people can understand and support, or that there's the terror fear, the fact that, if you can build the case that future terrorists are organizing and pose a threat to world travel and perhaps to Americans at home?
I think you just put your finger on two of the reasons why I believe the president's made the decision to send this limited amount of troops there right now, only as advisors. Number one is Russia's involvement. And we don't want to, we live in a bipolar world where we're not the only power. And you have Russia asserting its power there and us doing nothing. That's a very bad message to the rest of the world. The other part is we see ISIS with the bomb on the Russian airplane now for the first time, not just killing its neighbors, but literally reaching out to international terrorism. That makes ISIS a much greater threat to the U.S. than it was before.
But advisors is another, and I don't want to make it sound like I've taken sides or that I'm against it. I want to understand what we're doing, and I want to make sure that our leaders have thought this thing through. Advisors was the phrase perhaps kind of a weird phrase or a false phrase that was used back in the 60s. These aren't troops. This isn't combat. These are advisors. We're helping. If they're dying in a combat-like role, it feels like war. And it kind of, for some, I think, is going to put the lie to the notion that these are advisors in the sense that they're in a room with maps and, okay, you hold the gun like this, and we think you should attack here and not there. If you're dying in combat, are you advising?
Well, and I guess we lost one over the weekend. So, yes, you move from advisor to combat, but they're there primarily to direct the weapons that we have provided, to provide the logistics, to make the forces on the ground. There's been a lot of talk in the last couple of years about building up a moderate force. Well, we've also seen, unfortunately, trying to build that Iraqi army that without good leadership, sometimes they turn and run. Bruce, the really big question is we've yet either at the White House level or at congressional to articulate a serious strategy. The president earlier in the spring asked for authorized use of force in the Middle East, and Congress has just sat on their hands, both the Senate and the House. Senator Tim Kaine's been wonderful at pressing for this authorized use of force. Part of the reason is no one has a clear understanding of what the strategy is and are reluctant to commit force for that strategy.
The founders believed and left us a country where the only Congress can declare war and the president then fights the war and executes the prosecute, I guess is the phrase. He's the commander-in-chief. Are we in a world now beyond what the framers could have intended and beyond what the words on the page suggest is how things should operate? Is the notion of declaring war before we send troops, is that just out the window, or do you feel that on the prior use of force under the terrorism umbrella gives the commander-in-chief basically carte blanche to do what he wants where he wants?
Well, not carte blanche, but clearly the White House has interpreted the existing use of force memos, the one for Afghanistan, the one for Iraq, to be broad enough to do this limited intervention in Syria. But still, I think everybody conscientious enough thinks better to revisit those. Those are now 12, 14 years old. And look directly at Syria.
Not Iraq, and Syria's not Afghanistan.
Syria's not Iraq, yeah, right.
What are you led to believe is the cause transitioning here? What brought down that Russian jetliner, and what security changes globally do you expect? Travel needs to be safeguarded any time of the year, of course. We're heading into the holiday season, so more people are thinking about travel. Yeah. What, as a member of Congress, are you being told, and what should we expect, particularly where international travel or flights from abroad to the U.S. is concerned?
I've not been briefed by Homeland Security on this at all, but I do know that American flights right now already have very high standards. I'm hoping that the Russian flight didn't have the same kind of high standards that TSA has right now, and I imagine that they certainly will. And we've certainly seen a number of airplanes or carriers decide not to fly over certain countries, probably for fear of surface-to-air missiles.
If ISIS got a bomb onto that jet, does it say to you, this is a new moment for them and for us?
Absolutely, yeah, because everything else before was really directed just at their neighbors, and about acquiring territory and building some kind of infrastructure, governmental infrastructure, albeit one that's terroristic. The fact that they're bringing down first world airplanes is pretty concerning. Russia now, is it us next? We've certainly been far more aggressive at going after ISIS than Russia had been to date.
The U.S. and Russia have a chilly relationship, at least at the leader level. The hope is, and from what I can observe, the reality is that there hopefully is some cooperation on the ground as perhaps FBI and other world leaders in piecing together events of this type after the fact, and maybe even helping war game for better security down the road. One hopes that whatever assistance America can provide in that probe and in other ways is happening, despite whatever frostiness there might be at the president-to-president level.
It's been this relationship with Russia is very complicated. The president started with the reset button back in 2009, and we've unfortunately gone way past that with all their incursions into Ukraine and Crimea and the like. Yet at the same time, we're still working very closely with Russia on a lot of intelligence issues, on getting rid of a lot of the loose nukes that were in Eastern Europe. And I'm sure that we're working together on this terrorist incident.
What's your impression of the new Speaker, Paul Ryan? Do you know him well? What about him can you share with us to give a flavor of how Congress will operate with a new person in a key post?
Yeah, well, I don't know him well, but I certainly wish him well. And I was sad to see John Boehner go, but I wanted John Boehner to stand up to the Freedom Caucus, to the 30 or 40 people that were the most extreme in the party. He chose to retire instead, which I respect. And we'll see what kind of negotiation, what kind of deal Paul Ryan made in order to get their support for his election. It's a tough job trying to hold together 247 Republicans who are all over the place. But the good news, or what we want the good news to be, is that if Paul Ryan will speak to our leadership, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, to the president, because we can only do things together.
We're used to it's not unusual for a minority in the Senate to slow or block legislation. In fact, that's the system the framers left us, quite intentionally. It's less common in the House for a minority of the majority to really gum things up and maybe force the Speaker, a man with a huge majority, great numbers on his side, huge advantage in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. Have you been surprised by how all this played out? When it was Mark Meadows, I think, your Republican colleague from North Carolina, when he filed that motion from that obscure sort of motion, people said, guy's a wacko or he's out on his own. But Boehner dismissed it, others dismissed it. Boehner's gone. Has this been a surprise?
It has been a surprise, and I think unnecessary, although I'm not on the other side, so I don't see it from that perspective. But John Boehner could have gotten many, many things done with all 188 Democrats and a significant majority of the Republicans. As we did last 2 weeks on the Ex-Im Bank, Export-Import Bank, we had roughly half the Republicans and all of the Democrats. And that's a good way to get legislation done, not to be held hostage by the 30 or 40 people on the far, far right.
Talking with Northern Virginia Congressman Don Beyer. We'll take a quick break here. We're back, though, with more after this.